everyone, David and Karen of Film Courage here. Today we will be chatting with Jeremy Walker of Jeremy Walker and Associates, whose work includes The Blair Witch Project, Juno, Thank You for Smoking, The House of the Devil by Ty West, Paranormal Activity, and much more. Welcome, Jeremy. Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Hey, thanks for having me, you guys.
Yeah, we're incredibly honored to spend some time with you here, Jeremy. And to start off, for those watching or listening, and they may or may not be familiar with what it is that you do, can you sort of just capsulize what it is that you do?
Well, I'm a publicist, but that has so many different definitions and transmutations and different relationships to cinema. Right now, I'm earning a living, or as best as anyone can these days, I'm earning a living as a unit publicist on the set of movies as they're made, also consulting with people as they bring their movies to film festival. I work out of my house in Malibu, which is sort of in a very rural part of town. I like to think of myself as the Jim Rockford of independent film publicity. So I'm sort of an independent guy. I do my own thing. I do what I like to work on. So that's sort of me in a nutshell.
Okay. Where does your appetite for publicity come from, and why film?
Well, movies and specifically independent films have sort of been the waters I sort of grew up in, apprenticed in. It was, sociologically, I've told people it's because movies were socially acceptable to me and my peer group when I was a teenager. So, also I told people, and this is absolutely true, that my dad was a psychologist. So I would wait for him to finish his day in his waiting room. And he was the kind of psychologist that had a stack of New Yorker magazines as opposed to People magazines. And, it's true that a lot of people trace their love of cinema back to Paul and Keller. In my case, it is pragmatically true. It was hard for me to believe that someone could make a living writing about cinema. And of course, it was the only interesting part of the New Yorker, which every other section was boring if you're a young person. So it's sort of those two things, like socially acceptable in where I grew up. It's like if someone from GM, grew up in Detroit. I grew up in Malibu and around at least the periphery, if not the industry being right across the street. So, it was sort of inevitable in some way.
That makes me wonder. I mean, was it sort of the challenge that drew you in? Where you find something, you discover something that you say, you know what? I can't believe people make money that way. I want to be able to make a living that way. Were you drawn to the challenge of it?
I'll tell you, the industry literally came to me at a moment that was it was at a point in my life where I needed a mentor. I needed that person to say, okay, I'm about to make this movie. I need your help. I need someone's help. It might as well be you, or, you dated my daughter, in my case, and you wore a suit when you picked her up that first date, and so I automatically liked you. And it was really literally like that. And I was a production assistant in the office, and basically my job was to drive all around Los Angeles and do whatever I was told. And it came at an absolutely right time. But it also, a job like that instills in you, sort of the prime directive of movies. First, you shall do no harm. Second, you do everything you can to make that movie, protect that movie, help anyone who needs help on the crew, help anyone who needs help on the cast. I mean, it is that sort of, I like to call it the prime directive because that's what it is.
And how do you sort of take that and sort of branch that out and begin your own practice, your own publicity practice?
I had a number of mentors, and they began here in Hollywood. The first guy to give me my job was a guy named Jim Katz. And I didn't necessarily know this, but he began his career as a movie publicist. I mean, he tells stories about movie star. He was at United Artists, and he went on to run the classics division at Universal. So he re-released a lot of the old Hitchcock movies back in the 80s, if you remember that. So he was sort of a part of the art film scene here in here in town the way no one else was. Anyway, he was my first mentor. My second mentor in publicity was a woman named Carol White, who truly was, I became her assistant, and then I became a publicist in her New York office. She and I were literally, I was her intern in college, so I had great mentors. And that's really what anyone should seek out or frame it as. It's like, oh, I need a job. Well, do you need a job or do you need a mentor?
And from some of the research we've done on you, you've said that it's not just enough to love a movie in order to take it on. You've got to be able to love the movie and also know that you can do something with it. How do you make this distinction?
It's a very pragmatic way of looking at whether or not someone like me, and I think this also applies to any, remember, I'm in a service industry, okay? Agents, managers, publicists, we're all sort of in a service industry. So, know what you want for your film, I think. If you have an idea of a vision for what you want, you're looking for someone who can help you bring that vision to life. At the same time, people like me, the older we get, the more experience we have, the more we know, A, what's reasonable and possible, and B, what's right for us. And I've passed on plenty of movies that just weren't right for me, I knew intrinsically, and they went on to be huge hits. Sometimes it's a pragmatic consideration. I read the script. Here's a good example that's honest to God. The movie was Little Miss Sunshine. I was having a sort of a hot streak. Jason Reitman had me on the set of his first movie, I think, and I think the same producer was involved in both films, a very smart guy. And he was like, I want to send you this script. And I read it right away. I was troubled by it. I knew who was in it. I thought it would be a good movie, but I couldn't figure out, as a unit publicist, okay, as the person responsible ostensibly for bringing press on the set, I couldn't figure out how you bring press onto a set that was for the entire movie, except for the end, which you can't give away, how you bring press on the set, which is essentially an old Volkswagen bus that's moving. I couldn't figure out where you put the unit still photographer in that situation, let alone anyone outside, or third party, as we like to say. So I'm the idiot that passed on Little Miss Sunshine. I have more stories, but you probably have more questions. So.
Well, and speaking of still photographers, I believe you said that a still photographer on set is almost important, or as important as the DP. Do you think filmmakers are utilizing this, the power of a still photographer, to take those set photos?
It remains a struggle, and it remains a struggle, I think, for some very old school traditional reasons. And, what's fascinating to me is that, and this is something I just pragmatically learned, and I don't know why it took me my entire, career to figure this out, but you learn as you go. The still photographer represents the cinematographer. When a cinematographer works with a filmmaker, works with a director to create a frame, light it in a particular way, shoot it in a particular way, what gets represented in every magazine, every newspaper, is the still photographer's representation of that cinematographer's work. So to somehow exclude or shave days off in a production schedule or not give full access to the still photographer is really hurting not just, I'm absolutely convinced of this, the future marketability of the film, and therefore the future intrinsic value of the film, especially in this digital age when little bits of information are as valuable, they're like ammunition, it's like bullets, or whatever for the machine. You also have this issue of representation. if you don't give the still photographer full access, you don't represent the costume designer's beautiful work. You don't represent the cinematographer's beautiful work, the gaffer's work. You don't represent certainly the actors, the way that they could be represented down the road. So it really is that important, and I am that passionate about it, yes, to answer your question.
Mm-hmm. And at this point in your career, do you seek out projects, or do they come to you, or a little of both?
A little of both. I mean, look, if there's one thing a publicist can tell you, it's that a big part of the job is being rejected, is being ignored, is being, that's it. I'm never going to hear from that person again, even though I shared some really good ideas with them. And that could be as a journalist pitching or that could be as a publicist pitching a journalist, that could be as a publicist or a consultant like me pitching a client. I've been known to send letters to heads of networks suggesting certain talent go in the anchor chair as those discussions come on every so often. So I'm not afraid of pitching the big idea or the crazy idea, if you want to call it that. At the same time, I think very pragmatically. And when I'm on a movie set, I think particularly pragmatically. And I usually take a defensive posture. What's best for the movie? Do we expose it to certain journalists? Do we not? Do we just keep our heads down and plow through? Every movie is different and every circumstance is different. So I hope that answers your question.
And going back to the Blair Witch Project, because that was a project that sort of came to you. What was it about that project where you said, you know what, I really want to take this on? And at the same time, was that a project that you had sort of been waiting for? Did you have any sort of sense of what might happen with that one moving forward?
The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity are both, as the producer of Paranormal Activity has pointed out, both of those projects, both of those films are sort of once in a lifetime, once in a career, once every 10 years sorts of things. It's interesting to me that the cover date for the Time and Newsweek covers that sort of happened on the same date, the cover date was August 16th, 1999, happens to be my birthday, which is crazy. Happens to be Madonna's birthday. The day Elvis died, the 16th of August, so there's this weird sort of... but those happened at a very specific time in the culture. A little snipe on the Time magazine cover that had Ed and Dan on it. Internet stocks, are they worth it? I mean, that movie happened at a very specific time in our culture. And it was the filmmakers themselves. It's absolutely true. My mentor, Carol White, once said about Richard Linklater, the independent filmmaker is often the best marketer of their own work. And that's absolutely true. It's true in the case of Richard Linklater and Slacker. It was true in the case of the Blair Witch Boys. And the famous website already existed. So to sort of answer your, before Artisan, before anybody bought the movie, it was a little goofier, but they were, I think, the first filmmakers to complicitly participate in and drive the creative force of the web in their own film. They'd always thought of it in that way. Artisan recognized the opportunity and brilliantly created some amazing opportunities, original stuff, stunts. They did everything any fantastic independent distributor of the day did for this film, and they did a fantastic job on it. So,
And when did you get involved with the Blair Witch Project? Was it before Sundance? And then also, how long did you stay?
The filmmakers showed me the movie in I believe, my memory serves, October. It had been submitted to Sundance. I do not know if they had been given any heads up or whatever, but they were like, being good, proactive filmmakers. Someone had given them my name. They showed me the movie at Anthology Film Archives way downtown. I guess it's where they could get a room. I don't know. They filled it with some people. It was a relatively full screening. I don't know if it was friends and family or what. I do know that Heather Donahue was in the house, the star of the movie, and I was introduced to her, I think, just for a moment before the film began. Movie starts. I see a little red dot in the corner, and I realize that the audience is being videotaped. So I'm like, all right, that's interesting. During the film, I'm thinking to myself, if they can maintain this verisimilitude, whatever you want to call it, if they can maintain this, illusion of found footage, real footage, this movie could work. That's basically how I felt about it. It totally did. I said as much to the filmmakers afterwards. I told Heather Donahue that I thought she was going to be, her performance was amazing, and I thought she would be a big star. And it was great. And we just talked from there, and that's how I became involved.
And what role?
Oh, you wanted to know also how long I was involved.
Yes.
I was involved through the theatrical release of the film.
Oh, okay. And my next question was,
and the client was Artisan, who distributed the movie, hired me.
Oh.
Not me. They hired the agency I worked for. It was a bi-coastal situation. Harry Klein, I think at that point, was, if not my partner, certainly my partner in crime. His office in LA did the LA campaign. So it was a fascinating... We, helped the movie go on the market. We stayed involved with the film and the filmmakers through release. And I've continued to consult with those guys occasionally. I mean, I've been on the sets of some of their movies. They remain filmmakers, and they remain extraordinary gentlemen, I might say, too.
And we talked about when Artisan picked up the film. We believe that when it was picked up, it was sort of estimated that it was going to gross between $7 and $8 million. That was going to be the theatrical run. The opening weekend, it hit at $30 million. When did you begin to believe that this film was going to sort of exceed the expectations? When were you able to sort of sense that this film was really going to sort of skyrocket?
Well, I don't want to position myself as someone who understands box office or numbers or things like that. In fact, if I have a flaw, it's probably great for me to reveal this on the internet in front of God and everybody, but if I have a flaw, I'm not good with numbers. I never have been. I've been the kind of publicist, at places like Sundance. I've always been very interested in the deal side, how publicity and sales sort of intersect. Okay, that's kind of what always fascinated me from the first time I ever went to Sundance until today. But I'm not. Don't ask me about box office. Don't ask me about numbers because it's meaningless. The figures and circumstances you cited feel inaccurate to me. Okay. The movie opened at the Angelica Film Center first, I believe, on just one screen. Let's put it this way. I believe it was part of the playbook to inflate demand by keeping supply small. So it was important and strategically part of the goal to have every show sell out, highest per screen average. It's a blockbuster. That's when you started to make. That's when you started to create momentum, have teeth in the marketplace. Everybody wanting to book this movie. I'm not a distribution expert either, but I can tell you a piece of narrative that came about. Two things happened, and they both involved a movie with Catherine Zeta-Jones, and it was a Universal picture called The Haunting. Okay. Right? Does this ring a bell? It's like a big, elaborate, maybe Amblin produced remake of the haunted. Anyway,
Okay.
that was to open around the same time as the Blair Witch Project. But the Blair Witch Project numbers were so big that our theater owners were really paying attention to it. And so the head of distribution, and it's probably horrible to name names, I don't know, a woman at Universal named Nikki Rocco, who was legendary head of distribution, and by sharing the story, I by no means have any disrespect for her. I don't even know her. I've maybe met her once back in the day. But she did this thing, or somehow it happened, where they decided to move that huge studio movie away from the Blair Witch Project. And they told like Variety or whatever why they were doing it. And so suddenly there's this narrative, okay, about how this little teeny movie is suddenly Hollywood's afraid of it. And that literally is what was on the cover of Time magazine, or maybe it was Newsweek, I can't remember, why Hollywood is afraid of this movie. And that became the narrative. The other thing that happened was that after all the critics, print critics primarily, had given Blair Witch Project pretty darn good reviews. Janet Maslin compared it to I wouldn't call this a good review, but she compared it to a log cabin built out of soda cans. It's just something you have to see. I mean, that's not exactly a quote you put on an ad. But aside from her, reviews were great. When that Catherine Zeta-Jones haunting huge studio movie opened and simply was not in any way, shape, or form scary. It wasn't funny. It was just this whatever, huge, bloated, meaningless thing. The critics went after it and said, go see the Blair Witch Project instead. So how many things contributed to the success of this movie? Great distribution team, everyone at Artisan, careers were made as a result of this movie. It was a huge team. The West Coast office of Klein and White or Klein and Walker, whatever it is, I can't remember. They did a huge amount. Cover of LA Weekly. I mean, there was a huge print campaign that this movie had that was, just starting to be de rigueur for movies that popped at Sundance in the summertime. And that sort of pattern still exists today.
What we're also curious about, Jeremy, is sort of the size of the publicity teams that work on the independent features that you work on, and how do the size of those teams, how do they compare and contrast with the publicity teams of those that work on the larger studio films?
Okay. When I said I was like Jim Rockford, like I was the Jim Rockford of independent film publicity, like he was a lone gun, I'm a lone gun, I do not keep a 38 in the cookie jar, but that's not out of the question. So I work without a staff. I work on basically 1 or 2 films at a time. That's the way I like it right now. But, I can sort of answer the question because when I had an office in New York, it was me and 4, 5 really talented people who really cared about this particular segment of the marketplace. The character of it, I think, is what really attracted us. Also, I have to say, after being here for a while, I'm a native of Southern California. I'm a native of Malibu, but I came of age and practiced for a couple of decades in New York, so I sort of have both perspectives. There's a reverence for journalism that exists in New York that I don't think can possibly exist here in LA for a number of reasons, especially when it comes to what I like to call the Hollywood industrial complex, okay? Entirely different set of ethics, set of rules out here than in New York. The other thing is that in New York, this wasn't the only game in town. Publishing, newspapers, magazines, morning shows, David Letterman, Conan O'Brien. There was a certain I like to say that people in Los Angeles in the industry were afraid of New York because they couldn't control it. And I think that still exists to this day. Have we sort of gone off track? Is that okay?
I'm still hoping to hear. So, I hear that you've had you're working with about 4 or 5 people, or you have on your publicity side. What about the studio features when they unroll? When they roll out a film, how large scale are their publicity teams?
I'm not going to really answer that question because I don't have a great, huge, vast amount of experience on inside how studios work.
Yeah.
A little bit here and there.
Okay.
I will say this. There's New York. There's Los Angeles. Everything in between. It's that everything in between infrastructure that is as responsible for the success of, let's just say, The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity. Both of those films shared this. That infrastructure has the horrible umbrella of regional. Those are often the real unsung heroes of the craft of publicity, at least in terms of releasing movies maybe nationwide, creating this little phenomenon. It can't just be New York, it can't just be Los Angeles, it has to be everywhere else too.
For an actor or a filmmaker, how important is it for them to know their own personal story before they go to the press about their film, sort of their elevator pitch? How important is that they kind of know their own little quick background, little catchy soundbite about who they are before they go to the press about their film?
Not every movie is different. Personal narrative created the Brothers McMullen. Personal narrative created Ed Burns, intern or PA or whatever at Entertainment Tonight in New York. Mother did the catering. His film worked on some level at the right place, right time, Sundance Film Festival. Tom Rothman. The Fox Searchlight was created basically by that movie in a lot of ways. That was all personal narrative. So not every film has one, okay? It's called backstory, or used to be. Not every film has one. Sometimes the backstory of, quote, independent films, unquote, so lurid and fraught with, the usual horrors, interpersonal horrors after making an independent film. Oh my God, we've all heard the stories. How does that become part of the film's backstory? What's the line? Where do you cross it? That's kind of where a publicist, a smart one, can help a filmmaker. I've told people in the past, I'm as much, a marriage counselor as I am, media strategist sometimes when it comes to these films and these filmmakers, because independent films are intrinsically more personal. There are more issues, and I think, to answer your question to some degree, part of it is helping the filmmaker articulate what's their film, their vision for it, but also how it works in the context of what else is going on in the whole world. So,
And at what stage did you get involved with Paranormal Activity? Wasn't the film dormant for a few years before you became a part of the project?
The producer, Jason Blum, showed the movie to me at his house with a few other people. Oren Peli was there. Bret Easton Ellis was there, which really, really freaked me out because I'm a huge fan. And afterwards, we talked about the movie. I recognized that it was intrinsically, commercially, again, you get that feeling. If they can pull it off, then, the sky's the limit. And it was press pause for a while, and then Um, I think that's all I'm going to say because I could tell a really good story about opening night of the New York Film or the LA Film Festival and what came across everybody's Blackberries that night. I'd never seen that happen before, but it was amazing. After that happened, it was like full steam ahead, and he and I were talking, and it was great.
So in that night, you're sitting amongst a crowd of people watching this film. What did you see in it that gave it that sort of, where you got this aha moment? Did you see the same elements that the Blair Witch Project had?
It's funny. It's been mentioned that the two have certain things in common. They have in common the first-person narrative, but they have a very, very different aesthetic. If you look back at the Steven Soderbergh movie Bubble, okay, which was one of the first high-definition video productions that went to Toronto Film Festival. It was a great, great Steven Soderbergh movie, I thought. The one word he used to describe his methodology, or whatever you want to call it, stillness. That movie was set in a factory where people assembled plastic dolls, and they worked very slowly, and so the whole frame was still. Paranormal Activity, it was also about stillness. It was also about fast forward. It was also about pause. It was also about first-person video diaries. So Blair Witch Project, if you think about it, was all about motion. It was all about being awakened in the middle of the night and having the shit scared out of you. You knew it was coming, just as the actors did. And that was also about method filmmaking. I believe that the actors were in a great deal of control, quote unquote. They certainly had an editorial voice in the creation of the film itself in the Blair Witch Project. I feel like Paranormal Activity, one thing that Oren Peli talks about is how, yes, it is a camera on a tripod, absolutely still, but it took him months to figure out what that absolutely still frame should be. Mm-hmm. Something you don't think about when you think about that movie necessarily.
I just wanted to ask you about this Steven Spielberg story that is attached to Paranormal Activity, the one where he took...
You know what? I'm going to interrupt you because I know about the story that you're talking about. But
did you make up the story? Is that a story you made up, or tell us the truth about that, Jeremy?
I feel like Bill Gates right now. It's not helpful. It's not germane. It's not relevant. No, I'm kidding. Look. The reason I don't want to talk about it was because it came about, I had nothing to do with that. It was not for my purview. Here's what I know. If you look at the executives involved, who went from DreamWorks to Paramount, when they rubbed together for however many, when they copulated for a while, who stayed where, those people were... they knew the dude. It's absolutely plausible, absolutely plausible. I mean, of course you would give Steven Spielberg a DVD of the movie. Duh. Anyway, but I had nothing to do with it, so I can't think.
All right, we'll move on past that. One thing that would be really helpful to our audience, and something that's not talked about regarding Paranormal Activity really, is the fact that before this movie was known, before this movie blew up, they started... in college towns around the country, and they sold out 12 out of 13 midnight screenings in college towns. What kind of effort, what kind of work did they put into those screenings to sell out this movie?
I think I covered that because when I talked about the people who work in the places that are not New York and Los Angeles, mm-hmm. Okay? I think it was a fascinating petri dish as a totally outside observer. I did not contribute to that decision. I wasn't a part of that decision. But I thought it was a fascinating petri dish in which it was a college town. It was the right audience. They can be prepared for the movie in some way. I'm not saying that there was a lot of voodoo or anything. I do know that the studio was in touch with the exhibitors very closely. I do know that they heard about the audience directly from, all that stuff. And the other thing that you have to remember is that the other side of this, I don't want to say, oh, it was only the regional people, but they do deserve a huge amount of credit for this. It was also, like, I suppose, the Blair Witch Project, used internet technology to enable the audience to talk about the movie. The movie is intrinsically scary. Let the audience share that with each other. And so, literally, I'd never seen this done before. Amy Powell, who's the head of interactive marketing and now the head of InSurge, this is her own division at Paramount. Yeah. She and her fantastic staff had laptop computers in the lobby. So on the way out, the audience members were invited to tweet their scream. Ann Thompson has already raved about this at IndieWire. It's absolutely true. It's never been done before. It was absolutely genius. And it was the right medium for the right movie at the right moment. And it was really cool to see that happen. But I had nothing to do with it. I can't take credit for it. Her name's Amy Powell. She's been rewarded with her own division at Paramount.
And that was my next question, because it appears that Paranormal Activity seemed to pop, so to speak, much easier than the Blair Witch Project. And so is it a simple fact of the maturity of the internet?
Okay, it's a great question. A lot of times, and this is so true, if you're at all in the optimist's game that is independent film, and you've been in it for any amount of time, you know that sometimes it takes time for great movies to ripen. Okay? In the case of Paranormal Activity, it always was a great movie. Always was a great movie. It took, and just as a publicist can do 1,000 different things, a producer can do 1,000 different things too. And the producer of this movie, this character, Jason Blum, also knew intrinsically that sometimes movies need to ripen. He has his own amazing resume, but he recognized the potential in this film. He stayed with it. He knew when it was time to let it ripen. He was the first person to bring the press in strategically on this movie, So it did take a long time. And that's sort of why I think it's interesting that you say, the Blair Witch Project, both of those movies popped. Paranormal Activity popped because the buildup of pressure inside the bottle needed a lot of time, relatively speaking, getting into a wine metaphor. I better watch it or I'll turn into Elvis Mitchell and start using food metaphors to match. No, but that needed time to ripen. The Blair Witch Project was a relatively fast acquisition. You can say truly that movie popped at Sundance. Paranormal Activity, I think, was rejected by Sundance. It all has to do with timing. It all has to do with the right people recognizing what the movie can do 6 months, a year from now in this environment. And it's always a crapshoot, too. There's plenty of good movies that should be taking advantage of all these new creative deals that probably are, but again, it takes time. Sometimes they do pop, and that's exciting.
So many sort of people in our world, so many filmmakers. We're at this DIY age. And you have someone like John Reese who's written a book, Think Outside the Box Office, where we're taking on the responsibility of sort of not only making the work, but also working to push it out there and sort of self-distribute. Along those lines, for those of us who are doing that, how many media outlets should actors and directors target? Is there a sort of, should we be more focused on going after quality or focused on going after quantity?
Okay, that is a really interesting question. First of all, I like to say that in this era of the internet and terminators who become governators, who are at the same time fornicators. The idea of choosing outlets has really a quaint. It depends on the news, it depends on the project, it depends on the film, it depends on the circumstances. Is this a movie that's going to market? Is this a movie that's or going on the market? Is this a movie that you're releasing to gazillions of moviegoers? Is this a video on demand? I mean, there are too many spheres that your question encompasses to answer concisely. That said, we're in the age that one media outlet is all it takes to create a sensation. It's called a scoop. It's the one thing about journalism that hasn't changed in this era. The Terminator turned Governator turned fornicator. I was just reading on the Wrap.com, one of my big sources, was basically forced to tell the truth by the LA Times. So, how does that paradigm independent films? Well, if it's a horror film, your choices are sort of, in a great way, in a fundamentally kind of great market-driven way, Fangoria, Dread, Shock Till You Drop. There are more that I love and I've trafficked with. I just can't think of them at the same time. Some of those might be owned by the same people. In a strange way, the last 2-3 years, some of which I've sort of sat out by planting a garden or lying on the beach, the consolidation of the internet and the way that great quality internet outlets and print outlets are sort of merged. I'm thinking of the Washington Post, Slate. The New York Times has created its own wonderful video library. It may seem like a digression, but New York One News, Time Warner Cable's all news station in New York City, if you go on their website, there's a huge archive of content with all prominent New Yorkers from all walks of life. It's called One-on-One with Bud Mishkin. All of those things have sort of shifted the publicity paradigm in a way that it's sort of like a big reboot. The way that Osama bin Laden's death is a reboot for the culture and our energy. Over the last few years, everything's become a lot easier. At the same time, the market remains as glutted and horrible as it ever has been for independent films. They've become easier to make. They've become less easy to market because it's a tsunami. Does that even remotely answer your question?
Yeah, you're touching on a lot of great stuff there, Jeremy. Yeah. You had something, Karen?
Well, in keeping with that, so then how has your job changed in the last 5 years?
In the sector of independent film, 5 years ago, I was doing everything I could to dominate, say, the press narratives that would come out of the Sundance Film Festival. Okay, my staff and I would take on a slate of films, and there are other agencies that do this, and I highly recommend filmmakers going to Sundance look at these sort of, I want to call them full-service agencies with the staff, because they're exactly right. It's great to take on a bunch of films to Sundance if you have the staff and experience and you understand the Sundance culture enough so that you can service the filmmakers properly. There's nothing wrong with that. I just don't do that anymore. I would rather do what I did at this year's Sundance Film Festival, consult with an agency on a specific plan, do the writing, that kind of thing. Or I would rather go to a film festival with 1 or 2 titles that I can really bring something to. So that's how I've changed in the last 5 years. How has publicity changed in the last 5 years? Well, I think to answer that question, you have to sort of ask, how has the news business changed in the last 5 years? CNN has totally changed the way it delivers news, how it prioritizes things. It's fascinating to see them awkwardly go from wall-to-wall coverage of Libya to all these insane news stories lately, and then somehow try to fit in culture. It's interesting to see how that's going on. So publicity has to change with how the news changes. What is that sort of, part two of the newspaper? Okay, what are the priorities for culture? All that changes with the priorities of the day and the news of the day. I truly believe that.
And lastly, let's go back to the rap.com, because I believe you wrote an open letter to MPAA Chairman Dodd. And in it, you talked about a certain journalist who exposed key elements of a script.
Of a script, the movie that I was working on that at the time was still in production. And, if you guys, I don't know enough about you, but if you guys or any of your viewers have ever worked on a movie set of any movie, Hollywood spectacle, independent or interpersonal drama, you know how hard it was to get there. You know the spirit of collaboration, all the people that it takes to make that movie. And I do believe that it is a crime against cinema to, in the middle of production, okay, because it's in this age of giving digital bits away here and there, that is how you market movies. And there is a fair play journalistic element. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what this journalist did. Her name is Bonnie Fuller. Her outlet is called Bonnie Fuller's Hollywood Life, and it's hollywoodlife.com. She revealed twice, and she knew full well that by doing this, she was bringing pain. She was stealing something that didn't belong to her, exploiting it for her own use. That sounds like thievery to me. That sounds like piracy to me. That's what I did become upset. I was able to tell this to one of the people who work in her LA office on the phone. I'll use this platform now, if you don't mind, to apologize to the LA office of hollywoodlife.com, because on that day I was very upset, and I used colorful language. I got upset. I was mean on the phone to two people. I'm sorry to those two people. I apologize for my bad behavior. I was mean because I couldn't get a hold of Bonnie Fuller in New York. I made initial contact on that day in April, and they quite professionally and cordially took down the thing right away. And then to put it back up a week later, knowing full well that it was a really upsetting thing, and I used the same metaphor, like kicking a pregnant woman in the stomach on the phone, as I did in my letter to Chairman Dodd. So and the second time they were ready for me. They switched me to their publicist. They didn't want to deal with me. I wasn't, I asked to talk to Bonnie Fuller. I wasn't given that opportunity. So, it is very, very upsetting to me. And the reason I sent that to Christopher Dodd, I just heard him talk about piracy. And to me, it is as much a crime against cinema for anyone to take something that's not theirs, posts, we work in a business of narrative, of fantasy, to take those salient moments from what may be an old script, what may have been cut out from the movie, may have been reworked. She's intruding on the creative process. And that's a crime, and I do believe that's a crime, and that's why I made my letter to Chairman Dodd, and I'm glad. I want to thank the Rap for posting it, because it's really important stuff.
And I know that came up earlier in the conversation here, Jeremy, about sort of ethics. You mentioned the ethics in that are sort of in New York, as opposed, how they may differ in Los Angeles. I mean, how competitive is sort of the world of publicity getting? As more and more people are sort of just reaching out and grabbing it and trying to because it's becoming harder to market and promote because of the glut of content we see. You know, what thoughts run through your mind?
Well, it's interesting. You have the perspective that the market for publicity is more competitive. Are you asking me about like you know?
More and more news outlets, more and more press outlets, and people maybe not honoring a certain code of ethics that maybe you sort of grew up with in the business?
I'm no angel. I've made mistakes. I once lied to a reporter at the Hollywood Reporter during the Sundance Film Festival. This was 20 years ago. I'd given an exclusive news about Sony Classics to Variety, and the Hollywood Reporter heard about it. And I was tired, and I didn't know what to do, and I learned my lesson, I've probably made bad decisions. I've probably been rude to people. But otherwise, I think my reputation is relatively as a very affable and ethical person. And, when Ronnie Chasen was murdered, Ann Thompson in IndieWire sort of saw her death as the end of civility in Hollywood. And I think that if I'm known for one thing, it's working in a civil manner. And I think there was a lot about the open letter to Christopher Dodd that wasn't necessarily civil. I did use colorful language, but I think you can act sternly and civilly in this business at the same time. So, but at the same time, ethics are ethics. I don't think they've changed that much in the last 10, 20 years. The other thing that I think, question has sort of as a faulty premise, if you will, to borrow something from Harvey Levin. I've found in my sector of the industry, that independent film, Sundance, Tribeca, Toronto, South by Southwest sort of sector of the market, publicists aren't competitive. They're collegial. We all know each other. We all come from the same few places. So I will say that there is, in our segment of the things, and I'm not talking about every publicist or every Hollywood independent film, we all know each other. We all like each other, more or less. I refer business to so-called competitors all the time. People refer business to me all the time. We have known each other for so long that we know what is right for one, not right for one. We share business sometimes. So, it's not as cutthroat as you make it seem, you guys.
No, forgive me. I read something, and maybe I'm just sort of putting my own little spin on it, so forgive me there. Just wanted you to elaborate. Do you have anything else?
I think that's it. I think we've covered a lot here. Thank you, Jeremy, so much for your time.
I feel like I've been to my dentist. I know that you and I have been talking for a long time about doing this. I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope it's helpful.
Yes,
and
extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thanks for the time.
Yeah. On our end, we're fascinated by you, Jeremy, and we're just so grateful that you would take time out. And we saw your cat sort of floating in and out of the background at times.
Is it a Siamese?
Oh, really? Oh,
it was
smush. Oh my gosh. All right. That'll make the video go viral.
Everybody gets their 15 minutes, yeah?
Exactly.
But thank you for joining us
today,
Jeremy.
Thank you so much.
This has been great.
All right, you guys. Take good care.
Okay.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.